So I'm Sarah Doody, and I am a user experience designer. I've been doing this for about the past 14 years, working at a large company, a large software company in Portland, Oregon for a while. Then I moved to New York City to pursue the startup thing, and then I've been working on my own as a consultant for the last 5 years. So I've had this unique perspective of operating in large organizations, startups, on my own with clients. So I'm sure all of you fall into one of those categories. And I do a lot of writing and speaking and teaching and stuff like that. Teaching's one of my passions, so I'm excited to kind of spend some face time. A lot of my teaching is online. But before we get started, I just want to lay out what we're doing. So like I said, there will be the 15-minute break at 10:30, a lot of activities after that 10:30, and then in the beginning we'll get into a little bit of the theory and how-to of storyboarding with some activities for you as well. And also, I'll make these slides available in the second half of this workshop because you'll want to refer to them during the activity, but I don't want to give you access now or else you'll skip ahead and won't pay attention. And I really want this to be interactive, so if you have questions, just raise your hand and we can stop. I don't want to hold Q&A to the end, otherwise I think it'll just seem out of context. So feel free to jump in and let me know if anything comes up as we go. But first of all, I just want to know a little bit about you. So what are your roles? Who's a UX designer? Might not even have to ask the second question. Okay, what about like the difference between who does UX research? Okay, so we have some researchers, front-end developers. Any developers? Okay. Anything I left out? Marketing? Product? Founder? Okay. No one's left out? Okay. Good. And then I'm curious, what companies do you work at? So who's at, say, a startup? Let's say, below 100 employees or something like that. Okay. A little bit of startup action. Let's say established companies, so you're out of that startup-y phase. Okay. Nonprofits? Government? Whoa, no government. Okay. Anything else? Like consultants? Agency. Sorry, I forgot you. Okay, cool. Whoa, I don't know if you saw in the Slack channel, or some of you might have received an email from me, but I said, okay, when you're making your way here, try and document your experience getting here. And I know some of you maybe drove. I think someone had an interesting experience driving last night or the day before or something. Flying. So did anyone actually do that activity and has anything to either show or just share verbally? Okay, so I want to do a little activity here. We're all in groups here, so let's stay in these groups. And what I would like to do is have one person in the group be the storyteller and recount a travel story. It doesn't have to be how you got here. It could have been travel over the holidays. It could involve flying. It could not involve flying. But the goal is that one person's going to tell that story. The rest of the group will listen, take notes about that, and also do a little bit of interviewing about that person. We're not going to go crazy because this is not like a research workshop, but I want you to do this. So we'll get into, or stay in your groups, and then here are some questions that you could ask. These are kind of flight-centric because at first I was going to make this all about flying, and then I realized I had to back it up a bit, but you get the idea. And when you're kind of interviewing this person or more interjecting in their story, one recommendation I have is to always ask tons of follow-up questions. So, well, what happened next? Why did you decide this? Is that thing that happened what you thought would happen or expected to happen? And just try and peel back those questions, because whenever I'm doing research interviews, a lot of clients say, well, we have 30 questions we want on this discussion guide, let's say. And I always say, we'll never get to all those 30, because for every question I ask, I'm always asking 5 extra follow-up questions. So we're going to only spend 10 minutes on this, and then there's a little additional thing we'll do after this. But the other people in the group, take notes. All right. If you want to, I need a buzzer or something. Actually, I was in Australia, and they said just put your hand on your head like this. I guess in like kindergarten or something, that means be quiet. So I don't know. We'll do this. Anyway, so, okay, raise your hand if you were the traveler. Okay. And so the listeners, did you start to notice any themes around your traveler's experience, or problem areas or things like that. Maybe. Okay, good. So one of the things that you probably think right now is we have all these notes, and how do we make sense of it, right? This is probably something that we struggle with all the time in our jobs. And so who's ever used the Google Sprint method? Oh, good, not too many. Okay, you've all heard about it, you know the book and all that stuff. So one part of it is this thing they call how might we. And it's not super groundbreaking, but it just simplifies the process of making sense of your notes. So what I want us to do next I'm going to cut it down to about 5 minutes here, is we're going to use this method to go through your notes, and then what we're going to do is end up with like a collective group of these how might we's. So here's how might we's work. You have the how, and the how is framing it as a question you're trying to solve. You're being optimistic. Might is the optimistic part, and then we is the collaborative aspect. So instead of I or something, it's we. It's just a way for you and your team to get more collaborative, more optimistic about the things you want to explore. So the issue is you can't be too specific and you can't be too broad. So too broad would be, we want to fix the entire experience with flying with checked luggage. There's too much happening in that process, and it's just too much of a problem. Too narrow, make it easy to weigh, pay for, check, track, retrieve, and find if the baggage gets lost. That's way too narrow. So middle ground, redesign the process of checking a regular size bag. This is a bit subjective, but you get the idea. Any questions? So what you want to do is take your Post-it notes and then write HMW in the corner, how might we, and collectively look at your notes. Maybe each person maybe we'll do this. One person start out and take a few how might we's, and then the next person can go and kind of add to that. Does that make sense? And then we will organize those into kind of logical groups and steps. Questions? Okay, so by now you should have all your notes into the how might we format on Post-it notes, and maybe you started comparing your notes with other people. So one of the things that's great about these how might we's is I feel like it helps teams take like the politics a little bit out of setting goals, coming up with requirements, problems you want to solve, because you could easily see how in a company you could say, well, I want to do this so that our team gets more sales, or that so we don't have to spend so much time doing X or Y. And the how might we just makes it feel a little bit more collaborative, a little bit less political, a little bit less sneaky, if you will. So if you kind of struggle with that, this is a great activity. There's tons of resources out there on this how might we method and different variations of it. But it's simple, and it's also very collaborative, because you could easily sit down with people who are not on your team, stakeholders, clients, etc., and do this to help draw requirements out a lot faster than you could if you were in a very formal, buttoned-up meeting. And it just helps everyone get on the same page a lot sooner. But what I want us to do now is, now you have all your how might we's. So I want to take maybe 4 or 5 minutes and group them, not group/order them. So if you have a bunch of how might we's that have to do with rental cars or security or financiers or something, start to group them in those groups. And then if there is an order, do that as well. So if there's, like, you're leaving your house, you're traveling to the airport, try and make that sequence as well. Make sense? Okay, this timer is wrong. Maybe only 3 or 4 minutes. So here's the thing. If we had just sat down and started this out and said, okay, I want you to write out ideas of problems you could solve in the travel industry or trip planning or whatever, that probably wouldn't have produced these results, because I always like to say every product begins with a great story. And I think if we had started doing this without that initial interview at the beginning, it would have become very in the weeds. We would have got very feature specific. We would have been dependent on our knowledge of what might be technically possible. And we wouldn't have been, or also would have taken a lot longer, I think. And so you can see how in just, 30 minutes or so, we've done a little interview, understood a problem, understand that story, come up with opportunities and problems to solve, and then we have them in these groups. So now in theory, we could say, okay, we are going to tackle the rental car thing or the hotel part of this, and we could go build a prototype or concept around that. But we just did that in 40 minutes. So this all is to say that every great product begins with a really great story, and so that's why we're now going to move into the storyboarding portion of all this. But I want to say a little thing about data, because I know there's probably some data people here, research people here. So data, I love data. It's really important. It tells us a lot of awesome stuff, but it doesn't tell us that why. It doesn't tell us like that narrative behind what the numbers are telling us. And so that's why I'm such a proponent of research and stories and using this to help us wrap our head around the people and not just the numbers, what we're seeing in analytics or something like that. Okay, you already know this one. So why storytelling matters. So I want to talk a little bit about our current product development process. And I'm going to tell you a story about a company I was working at or with a few years ago. And so it was a consumer-facing product, and we were designing the header. I was a part of the UX team. We were designing the header. It was a pretty large company. There was a product manager, and we were debating between a few versions of the header. So on a Sunday morning, for whatever reason, she emailed the founder and said, hey, what do you think, header A or header B? And that's all the email said. She gave a link to each of the headers. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a disaster waiting to happen. So I just kind of ignored the email and thought, I'll check in on this maybe Monday morning or later Sunday night. So I couldn't take it anymore, and I opened my email. I had 69 emails in an email thread, and I wish I had the screenshot, but this really happened. There was 69 emails back and forth. The founder debating with the product manager, other salespeople were looped in. It was ridiculous. All this happening on a Sunday. And I just thought to myself, like, why does this happen? These were people that had previously sold companies for hundreds of millions of dollars, worked at Yahoo, were smart people. And I thought, how did a smart group of people end up with a 69 email thread about a header on a Sunday, right? And so I like to think that that interaction with that company confirmed this observation that I've had there. I'm working with a ton of other companies, that UX is like the glue of the organization, that you are like the switchboard, and you're the first to know when something is off. And who's ever played that game of telephone? Yeah, it's my favorite, right? It's fun when you're a child, but it's not fun when you're like an adult and you feel like this is happening in business, where I don't know where I got this from, otherwise I would accredit it, but it's like, maybe blue would be better than green. He says blue is better than green. Change it to blue, make the button bigger, blah, blah, blah. This is the reality. Who's experienced this? Yeah. And so this whole experience with this header got me thinking, why does this happen? Why am I in this company with all these people behaving like this? And this is what really got me onto this storyboarding thing. So we know this has happened with your teams. Does anyone have a little story they want to share about maybe a situation similar to my header debacle? Okay, so we all know this is a problem. And this led me to this, great. Okay, well, I'm just going to read it. This led me to this observation, I guess, that I think too often we focus on the execution, like your over-the-shoulder session, before defining the product opportunity or value proposition. And I think that we do this because the creation of seeing things happen on the screen or being able to click a prototype makes us feel like we have this progress. But it's a false sense of progress if it's not anchored on these real problems. And in your case, what's your name, shoulder designer? The guy, what's your name? Jonathan. Okay. So it's like what happened to you, when it's not anchored on a problem. People are just asking you to do things with no frame of reference. And then, like you said, it was a disaster. Oh, good. Okay, has anyone read this book, Inspired by Marty Kagan? Okay, great book, a little long. There might actually be a new version, I can't remember. But anyway, it's a great read. He has this awesome quote, though. It says, "It doesn't matter how good your engineering team is if they aren't given something worthwhile to build." And so I think that we as people involved in the product process, designers, researchers, front-end developers, whatever we are, we can use this storyboarding technique, which we're going to see in a few slides, to help give them something worthwhile to build, because we've all been in those meetings where like you can just feel the blood pressure of the developers rising as they're being asked to do things because someone is designing over their shoulder, basically. So all that to say, I think we focus on the what and the how of the product, the features, functionality. We get stuck in the weeds, and we let that why get left behind. Now, we could debate the names of these, the order of these, et cetera. We all know that some of these steps are happening in parallel, but think of this as our just traditional product development process. We do some discovery and strategy, experience design, visual design, technical development, release and launch. Sprinkled in, obviously, there's lots of research, testing, prototyping, things like that. But what I think happens too often is that we start with the discovery and strategy, but we only spend a tiny amount of time on that. But that's where the problem really lies. And we jump way into this solution too fast. And we spend the bulk of our time on the solution. And I love this quote by Einstein. He says, "If I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution." And we've probably heard this quote a million times, but I think it just really encapsulates the point I'm trying to make, which is we get so caught up on the solution, and we need to figure out how to come back to this so that we actually are creating a solution that's anchored in a true problem. So what we need to do is figure out how to make that problem last and be referenced throughout the whole product development process as we're building the solution, and not just be this problem that we explored and then is in a Dropbox folder or in a Slack channel that is never referred to ever again once we fire up Sketch or whatever our tools of choice are, because there's so many today. So why do stories and storyboarding really work? It has to do, one of the reasons I think, is because our brains remember stories. And this isn't just something I made up. There's real science behind this. So if you think of, even maybe over the holidays, someone was telling you a story, and in your mind you're listening to it, you're probably visualizing what's going on. Maybe you're seeing things in your head, you're smelling things, you're having different memories, and it becomes this thing that plays out in your head. And that's the neuroscience of fact and fiction. So when your brain is listening to facts, I apologize if you're a neuroscience expert, because this is very not specific, but there's these two parts of your brain that respond to fact, and they're processing language, or they're processing language, but there's these two parts. But as soon as your brain starts to hear fiction, all these other parts of your brain light up. And that's why when you hear a story, you start to maybe see things, or have a memory of a past smell or something, or have different sensations, have emotion. It's because all these other parts of your brain respond to fiction. And there is a really great article, if you want to follow up on this, called Your Brain on Fiction. And the author says this: stories go beyond stimulating reality to give readers an experience unavailable off the page, the opportunity to enter fully into other people's thoughts and feelings. And so this is why I think storytelling is so powerful for us, because it allows not just us, but maybe the people on our team who need to enter into other people's stories even more, such as stakeholders, boss, peers, etc. on our team. It gives them this tool to be able to step into their shoes that is a lot easier than them reading some spec doc or persona or something like that. But storyboarding, I think, or storytelling, I think, has become kind of cliche. So we read All these articles on storytelling, but a lot of them are focused on how to talk about your product after it's done, how to make the cute little video that's going to go on your homepage with the stick people, how to write about your product in your marketing. And of course, that's really important. But I think the power lies in how do we use storytelling in our product development process as we're building the product, not just, oh, it's done, now let's tell the story of why people should come use it, how we make the video, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think I skipped over some of these. Yeah, so let's jump into storyboarding. The storyboarding process, well, let's start here. Storyboarding basics. So I like to always do storyboarding before I ever make a wireframe, pull up Sketch, anything like that. And we're going to get into that in the next slide. But the reason that I love it so much is it reduces the barrier to entry. Just as you can see with that, how might we, hopefully you could imagine your stakeholders, your clients, your peers on other teams being able to participate in that and maybe lower the barrier of entry for them to get involved in your product development process. Same thing with storyboarding, and you'll see why. Also, it creates conversation, just like you guys were having conversation about your how might we's and how they formed into groups and stories and things. Obviously, it keeps the problem or focus on the people and solving their problem and not necessarily features. Another thing that I love about it is establishes so much context, helps us see through the user's eyes and not get stuck on, well, what's technically possible and things like that. And then we can use it as an anchor throughout the whole product development process, and you'll see in a couple of examples I have, so that it doesn't just get lost somewhere, but it becomes this thing that we are so attached to and that is so memorable for us and our teams that they almost become, the story almost becomes a member of our team, and that's what makes it powerful. And because of neuroscience, once we have these stories down, it's more memorable, and we avoid these scenarios of feature debates, really, where people might be saying, well, I think this, my cousin thinks it should be this way, I showed my niece, and they think it should work like this. So the storyboarding process really breaks down into 5 steps. We're going to walk through all these in a couple of different activities, but first we want to identify a problem, which is what you guys already did in these how might we sessions. So you identify the problem. We don't want it to be too big. We don't want it to be too small. We want there to be a specific outcome at the end, something for someone to do, achieve, something to happen. Then we figure out the characters. So who's involved in this story? When do they come into this story? And maybe even some of the characters might not even be a person. Maybe it's a hotel, an airport, something like that. And then once we understand the problem and the characters, then we write out all the moments. And you'll see this in example, but it's almost like little sentences or sequences that happen so that we can then be equipped with those to actually draw out the story. But based on those moments, we want to then layer in maybe what people are thinking or feeling or different highs and lows, because we know with every awesome story, there's that progression of introduction, some stuff happens, there's some big moment, and then there's the closing, not argument, but the ending, I guess. And then finally we sketch it out. So in the same way that we don't do storyboarding, or we don't create wireframes until we do storyboarding, we don't start drawing it out until we've done all these other things, because if we just start here, 2 hours will go by and we'll have like a stick person on the screen or something like that, and it won't really be fruitful. So let's go through an example here. The first is the problem. How might we make it easy for lost children to be found and reunited with their parents at an amusement park? So why are we going off into amusement park land? Well, I have a case study I'm going to walk you through, which is this, but we're going to go off airlines for a little bit and go into amusement park world. So the how might we is people are at an amusement park with their children. They get separated from their children for whatever reason. I don't have kids, but I've heard that happens. And then they get reunited. That's the good thing. But the only requirement is is that the children could not wear some type of tracking device. So let's take that off the table. That's not something we're doing. So that's the problem that we're going to now start to address with storyboarding. So 2 parts here. First part is we're going to take 10 minutes, and you're going to establish the characters, write out the moments, and then we're going to layer in your thoughts and emotions for each of those moments. And so you are going to do it, and then I'm going to show you what I did, but I want you to do it first without seeing what I did so that you use your own approach. Does that make sense? Okay. It's getting quiet. I guess I should put my hand on my head. So now I want to share, I guess first I'll share what I did for the characters, and then we'll see, I'm guessing everyone will have the same ones as me. I also know that you'll have a lot more than me based on what I was hearing. And also, it sounds like a couple of people either had this experience, a similar experience, maybe they were separated as a child, or temporarily misplaced a child or someone they were looking after. So, and I forgot, I have little prizes. So after this, I'll hand out some of those. But I just had to say that so I remember. Okay, so my characters, when I did this, I kept it really, really lean, and I said, okay, there's the family, there's the lost child, there's the park goers, and there's the park staff. Now, you could have gone very granular. For example, this group over here, what's your name with that? Bradley. So Bradley kind of asked, how granular should we go? Like, there's people dressed up in costumes and things, and one recommendation would be, imagine you were casting this as a movie or something like that. Who would be like on that first line of characters in the credits? It's the main actors. It's not like woman 3 standing in background with toque or something, or like person dressed up as Mickey Mouse. So that's a good frame of reference when you do your characters to think who you should really focus on. But who else has ones that you want to share that are not on my list? So here's the thing. These all had different levels of detail, and that's fine. There's no like right or wrong way to do this. The point is that we think through these moments so that when we do go off to sketch all this, we have a good starting point, and we're not just staring at a blank piece of paper, like 20 minutes later, nothing down on the paper. We have a good starting point. So those are my characters. So my moments, though, let me read you my moments. Okay, family is at the park having a good time. Parents notice the child is missing. Panic, what to do? Tell someone the child is missing or something, I don't know. People learn that the child is lost, so the other park goers. Someone sees the child somehow, and this, I guess, is one solution. Maybe the child turns himself into the information kiosk or something, but these were my moments that I just did as I was rapidly doing this. So someone spots the child. Child is freaked out. Parents are too. Then the child's found, they're reunited, and everyone is happy. But you could see how, because I went down this path of someone spots the child, you could probably write this out 2 or 3 other ways with different moments if, say, the child was going to turn themselves in. So what I always recommend is maybe you don't just do the moments once, but you go back and do it a few more times and add more levels of detail. Because, for example, you guys probably would have got somewhere like this, but it's great to start at that really high level because then this will go a lot faster. And you can come up with different, in this case, like solutions here. Child turned themselves in, I don't know, something else happens. So those were my moments. And then I'm not going to make you do the emotion thing, but because emojis were available on my computer, and when I did write this out, I had just drawn or written, because we have so many emojis available today, I just went a little nuts and used all of them. But if it could be dangerous doing that in the beginning, because then you spend 5 minutes deciding which smiley face to use. So write it out. You guys in the back, you were just writing like panic, frustration, whatever they were. That's a good way to do it first. And then if you were going to kind of add more fidelity to this, or maybe use this in a presentation for your team, maybe it would be good to add the visuals. But if I were just doing this on my product team or something, I probably wouldn't spend the time to do this. It's just the fidelity of who the audience is, right? So next, what we want to do is take the moments that you have, and now we want to sketch it out into the storyboard. It's a little hard to see, but those are little gray boxes. So what you want to do is take a sheet of paper, and let's see. For the sake of time, let's have one person do the drawing. If you want to have, if you're really passionate about drawing it out too, go for it. And then sketch out these moments. Now, a couple of things. Did I miss something? Okay. So the thing is, you're probably thinking, I can't draw. What am I going to do? It doesn't matter. This sketch is not, I always say this sketch is not an art project. It's just a communication tool. So you'll see my sketches. They're pretty illegible. You can only understand them if I'm describing them to you. But that's the point. Most of the time, these sketches, they're going to be something that you are talking about. It's not like you do this in your desk and then send it off to someone and they look at it all alone. So you're always going to be talking through these. That's why you have to get over maybe the concern that I'm not good at drawing. So I just use stick people. Maybe I put like hair, or I write parent or child to indicate whatever you need to do. Sometimes I use different colors. But don't worry if you're not good at sketching, because you can draw a stick figure. It'll be fine. But if you want to everyone draw, go ahead. It's fine if one person is the designated drawer, artist, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, we'll sketch all these out, and then I'll show you what I did. And then maybe we could have, we'll see how much time we have left. Maybe we'll have a little walk around, or I'll airdrop some of them to the screen somehow. I'll think about that. But I'm going to start the clock. Any questions? Another thing just to remember is we want to keep the focus on the people, like I said, but obviously there might be some component of, oh, an app comes into play or something like that. It's fine to draw in the device. Don't go drawing in like form fields on the device, or if it's a hamburger icon or something, don't do that, because you really won't get a prize. But it's fine to bring the device into play, but don't worry about what's happening on the screen. I forgot one thing. One recommendation is that don't have any more than 8 boxes on your piece of paper. And here's why. Because if you have more, it's going to be harder to draw, and you're going to get too far into the weeds. So start with 8, and then like as you would redo this, if we were doing this for real, you might end up with 24 boxes, but we're only doing 8 right now. Okay. It looks like you guys have made really good progress. So I took photos of some of yours, and I didn't get to take photos of everyone's, but what I think we'll do in the interest of time, I'll walk you through my solution, and then at the end of this little segment, we can show as many as we have time for, and maybe even during the break, you can mingle and check out other people's too. But I saw some really cool things. So, and we have the 10:30 break coming up in 20 minutes. So, okay, my storyboard. And like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do this. I saw lots of like sketches of various levels of detail and ability. But like I said, it doesn't really matter, because you're always going to be doing this with someone in a group. It's not just going to be hanging on a wall all alone, and someone needs to understand it without you explaining it to them. So this is really the first storyboard I ever did for this, this product idea. So super simple. In the top, well, no, we're going to go screen by screen. So scene 1 was they're at the amusement park. This was not for Disney. I just wanted to remember this was an amusement park. So they're at Disney, an amusement park, and then there's the family, 2 little kids, and I also am thinking about, let me show you here, as I do the storyboard, I like to, underneath the photo, I like to just note things I might want to think about or remember, because as you're drawing this, questions probably came up, ideas probably all came up. You don't want to lose those, so I just stuck them under the photo. You can do it however you want on another piece of paper or something. This is just how I did it. So let's jump in. So we're at the park, and then I was thinking, okay, there's going to be lots of distractions. It's crowded. It's loud. They're going to be outside. Maybe we'll have to account for like sunlight or something like that. If they're looking at a screen, that was getting a little into the weeds, but I wanted to capture that. Then second, they notice the child's missing. So now there's only the baby in the stroller and the other one's gone. So somehow at this point in my solution, I decided this is where an app is going to come into play. Because when I did this, I knew the solution had to involve an app. So I had the phone. I didn't put in all the details. I just had a button that said missing, just to capture that key moment. And this is their first interaction with the app. How they got the app, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter right now. And the idea is that this missing button would somehow tell other people at the park, or maybe even a park agent. Some of you guys were talking about like escalating to an agent. So that's what that button maybe would do. Then the next moment is that there's everyone else at the park, and they all have their phones or devices, and they're blinking and notifying that a kid is missing. So I brought the app into this, again, not in super detail, but just so if I were using this as a conversation with someone, they could start to see how the app in this case came into play. So Jack Brown, I gave him a name just so we could have a name for the character. Jack's missing. And maybe, I thought to myself, maybe we're providing just really key information. So photo, name, age, whatever. The alert goes out, and that's it. Then next, so everyone has this heightened awareness, and then this woman on the right spots the child. She spots Jack. So there's the arrow, like her eyes are looking, my wonderful drawing skills, right? But you would never look at this alone. Like, it makes sense when I'm explaining it to you.
Oh,
so,
no, we weren't laughing at the drawing.
oh, that's fine. So someone spots the child, and then, because I knew the app would be a part of this solution, the app is there just with a found button. Who knows what happens with that? Doesn't matter right now. It just is the action in the moment of saying the child is found. And then maybe a park agent gets notified. Not sure what else happens after that. This is where you could easily start to go into the weeds. And I did go down that path, and I tried to pull myself out. But I'll show you anyway. So then my idea was, okay, as soon as the thing is marked that the child is found, maybe we can get really fancy and reunite them before they're physically reunited using FaceTime or something. So we let them, just because you think of the emotional state, everyone's freaked out. Like, the parents are going nuts. The kid is probably really scared too. So if you can calm everyone down before they physically get to each other, that's a win. Plus, it may take a while depending on how far everyone's meandered and who knows what. But also, I think at this point, there's some type of instructions on what to do next. But that's as far as I got. I wasn't thinking of all those details. And maybe, I remember when I did this, maybe the park agent is somehow dispatched to this location. And you can see here, okay, so there's the family. This is the nice lady who found the kid. And because, let's assume GPS is enabled, maybe there's like a map or directions of how they come, or you stay here and we'll come to you. Again, who knows how it actually works, but that was just like the point of the storyboard. Get all these ideas out, get these moments, see how the app comes into play, when and where the key moments are. And then, like I said, as I'm doing this, a lot of you were asking questions and probably having some of these same thoughts. So I also like to capture like key things to consider, issues that might come up. Over here, key screens that I know I'm going to have. So now I know I need one screen about marking a child as lost, one screen that's the actual alert, one screen that's for the notification, found, reuniting, all these things. I'm not doing like forgot password or random things like that, because it doesn't matter. It's a waste of time right now. What else? This was my real sketch. So, okay, Kinpoint. Okay, I decided to name it Kinpoint at this point. Cute names. Everyone loves cute named products. Issues. So this was a good one. We had to remember the kid wasn't wearing a device. We had to assume that a photo is present, meaning the parent had a photo that they could like upload so everyone knows what the kid looks like. Are there freestanding monitors, displays around the park? I don't know. That would be cool if we could then put the kid's face on there, but I didn't know at the time. Does parent pre-fill out a child profile or something? Yeah, big issue, because if I'm at the park having a nice time and my kid goes missing, like, do I want to be filling out like profile of my children that has 27 fields or something? So could I do that in advance? I don't know, but these were all things to think about, because without that information of the child, this whole thing pretty much breaks down. So that was the whole thing. And then I ended up doing this, I don't know, 5 or 6 different times, refining it. And I mentioned that to you as well, because many of you said, like, well, what if there wasn't an app, and what if there was a button that the child pressed at key places that says, like, the child self-selects that they're lost. So if you had multiple ways to solve this, the next step would be to storyboard out all those different solutions. And of course, maybe the first 2 or 3 are all the same for each story. Everyone's happy, then they're lost, and who knows what happens next. But if we were doing this as a real project, we would map out all these different stories, and then quickly we would see, okay, well, this one seems a lot harder. Oh, this idea from this one really could work over here, without having to discover these things way down the line after you've maybe put them into wireframe format or something like that, or started to code it or test it even. So what would come next? Like I said, we would do more versions of this. We would also socialize the storyboard, like have a couple of meetings, I hate that word, but use this as an opportunity to invite people into your product development process far sooner, because if you can get them comfortable with understanding the story and contributing to the story, then they'll feel more bought in, and I think they'll be a lot more receptive to concepts, wireframes, prototypes, etc., that you show them. Whereas if you just all of a sudden do this and then spend a couple of weeks or something and show stakeholders a bunch of screens, they won't have had time to like marinate through this story and understand the context of it. So that's why I like to say invite people in, get their feedback, and probably you'll have a lot of great input from them as well. Okay, next, after we did a few versions of this, we felt comfortable with a couple of directions of our storyboard, then we would move this, and I'll show you, into screen maps, screen flows, whatever you want to call it, wireframes, prototype and test it, visual design and technical development. So first thing would be, I would want to flesh out the characters a little bit more. These personas ended up looking much different, but I want to take those characters a little bit because I want to make them feel human so that I can then use them in some screens that follow. But without these, it again is just eliminating some of the context that you need to have for your other stakeholders to really buy into and remember this story, because then once we have these guys in place, then we're in a meeting or something and people are debating features. You can say, well, actually, Jack needs to be able to do this, or Mary needs this, and it takes the I think this, I think that conversation out of it, and just that little tweak to the process of product development, I think can help us avoid a lot of the feature debates that we talked about earlier. So then I moved on and did some screen maps. So this is the storyboard, but what's your name that works? Yeah, David. Okay, so maybe for you, you spend a little bit less time in the storyboarding, but maybe your storyboards are more screen looking like this. So I took the storyboard and then I mapped it out into these really rough flows. The people are kind of still there, but I did it in like this two approaches. So I had the top thing, what's happening for the parent, and then the bottom row is what's happening with the other characters. So the park goers, their employees, and you can start to quickly see how each person may or may not use each of these screens. And then you can see I added a little bit more detail to the screens, thinking about like, oh, there would be a map here, or there needs to be something out like on the alert screen, a way to cancel the alert after the child is found. I remember doing this, and I got to the end somewhere like there, and then I realized, oh man, we have to cancel the alerts so that everyone else still isn't looking for the kid. But I wouldn't have realized that, I don't think, until maybe I had been wireframing these out or got further down the process. And then I translated these. So first of all, if this had been like a real product for an amusement park, I would have invited people in and shown them something like this. I think one of the things that storyboarding kind of opens the door for is letting people into our a little bit messy process. I think the temptation is to say, oh, we'll wait and we'll show them something like this. But you could get that feedback so early if you just showed them this or your storyboard and started to have those conversations a lot earlier. And also the other thing is you have to consider your audience. So if this is a product just for your like internal team, maybe you don't need to make really high fidelity stuff. If you're an agency, maybe you do need to make the high fidelity stuff because that's part of what they're paying for you or expecting to see. So then I translated these into pretty lower fidelity wireframes, let's say, but kind of map them out so you can see how they all flow together. The key actions, so the red is kind of showing like, okay, we have to report the child is missing, and then people get the alert, and they click, okay, we got to see the details of the alert, see the kid's photo, some information about him. Then that says report Jack is found, and then the next steps for the person that found the child, something goes to the parents that lets them know someone has found the child. And then details, that one, there's the option to call or FaceTime, it's a little blurry. And then the alert also goes to the amusement parks that everyone knows, okay, like close the loop, the kid is found, we can all go back to having a nice time at Disney or whatever. And then from there, we would end up, I'll show you the higher fidelity things, but I would say this. We spend way too much time, I think, going into the detail too soon, and that is so costly because, let's just jump to this one. So it's pretty basic, but I think we spend way too much time adding detail too prematurely and jumping to something that looks like this or like this. But I think storyboarding, the real power is forcing us to stay in this like really low fidelity, scrappy place, which is going to be less time and less money. And then we can apply that higher fidelity. But if we can operate in that space as long as possible, I think it helps us spot a lot of those red flags, come up with better solutions or alternatives, and then spend more efficient time designing in high fidelity. So ultimately, this is what this ended up. This is not the final design or anything. This is just a higher fidelity wireframe that I felt comfortable showing to external people. But the nice thing is, when people are looking at this, I wouldn't just show them this first. I would start out with that storyboard, and maybe it would be a little prettier or something, maybe not, but it helps frame that whole experience. And then we introduce those characters, and we could talk through the moments, and then we can show them the solution. And I think by using storyboarding to frame it like this, helps people be more receptive and focus on the people and not be like, I don't like that plus icon, or, you know, the photo icon is not good enough, or let's change the color of red or something. It's ridiculous. So if we can frame it around the people, it helps us avoid getting into all those details and keep our stakeholders on track and really manage our stakeholders. So this was reporting the child is missing. This was the alert, so they get the alert over there. Then the kid's missing. Somehow that information was available. Maybe the parents entered it once the kid was lost, I don't know. Then GPS, then maybe there was like photos, because Parents probably have photos of their kids on their phone, so pretty easy to upload a bunch. And then saying you found the child, you get the idea. And then what happens here? Oh, and then the person found the child, and then this whole sequence. So you can see how being able to kind of capture these moments that we talked about in Sketch becomes a lot more human. And, okay, we're over a little bit, but I'm going to run through these tips, and I think I've already mentioned a bunch of them anyway, and then it's coffee time. So first of all, I already said this one. The Sketch is a communication aid. You all know this. So if you were scared of drawing before, you are not anymore, because you realize that it's really a communication aid, and you're always going to be narrating your sketch anyway, so it doesn't have to be an art project level sketch. And I mentioned this one, but adjust that level of fidelity for your audience. So if you guys had pretty low fidelity sketches, other teams had higher fidelity. Maybe if you're in agency world, they're expecting to see like Pixar level storyboards or something, I don't know. But you get the idea. Focus on the people. Don't be worrying about the technicality of it too soon. Don't worry about the form fields and things. Focus on the people. Increase the number of frames as you storyboard. So I said 8, and I said 8 for a reason, because if I gave you 24, you'd still be working on it. You'd be messing with the order. Would it become very, very lost? But then as we feel confident about solution, we can increase the number of frames and get more into the weeds. But limiting the number of frames initially forces us not to go into those weeds. 5. I already said this one, but just to reiterate, as you can see, this would be a great way to invite your stakeholders into your process, but also get really clear on requirements, at least high-level requirements, before you are too far into design. And I had this client come to me, and they were doing something in kind of consumer health, and they said, oh, here's our wireframes. And it was 200 pages of balsamic wireframes. But there was no, like when I tried to get them to describe, like, well, what's the story? Like, give me the kind of the, not the pitch, but the overarching story, right? Could not do it because they had spent months making 200 pages of balsamic wireframes. And it took months to unravel that because they'd gone so far into the weeds, they'd built out so many solutions that it was a complicated product, and we had to go back and basically rewrite the story, if you will, and say, no, here's what this product should actually be. It's actually like only 30 pages or something. I made that up, but you get the idea. But how many months did they waste making 200 pages of balsamic wireframes? The group on the back asked this, could you use this in like research to do a before and after of this storyboard? Definitely. So I think it's really powerful if you can storyboard what is happening now in a product experience and then have that comparison of the after, especially if you can include little artifacts from research, like heat maps, videos of people using the product, et cetera, because when I talk more about research in workshops, I always say that the artifacts that you get from your research are like evidence in a legal case, and until you have that evidence to back you up, people will always say, I don't believe it, that user's wrong, like they'll dismiss everything, but until you have the video of someone trying to click the blue-green buy button and they're not clicking it, but it's like, 400 pixels wide or something, people will debate you all day long until you have that evidence. So the before storyboard could be a good evidence of like problem, and then you can compare it with your solution storyboard. Last two. We already talked about this one, but if your product doesn't have these, then don't worry about it. And then finally, probably the most important thing I would want you to take away is once you have this storyboard, don't let it live in Jira or Dropbox or whatever product management tool you use or don't use, because you want to have that be a constant throughout the process. Like I said, we don't want, remember back to the product development process, the little yellow problem. We don't want that to just be a silo. We want that to continue throughout the product development process. So every meeting you have, every wireframe review, everything, try and start out with a recap of this story. Just to refresh everyone, because it'll help avoid those scenarios of people quickly diving into the weeds, injecting, I think this, I think that, and it'll help you bring the focus back to the people, especially once you've layered in those characters and given them names. I mean, you don't have to like go really detailed, but just give them names, make them human, and refer to them throughout any wireframe review I do. For example, with this 200 wireframe client, every meeting I had, I was like, okay, here's the story, remember the story, and it got really repetitive, but it helped avoid the scenario of then re-adding like 40 different features that they had already planned out. And there's a bonus one that I forgot. This kind of goes without saying, but always be editing that story. So we started with one. If this were like a real situation, we'd probably do 5, 6, 7 more storyboards for this amusement park thing, editing it. And then even maybe as we get further down product development, we might even edit the storyboard further after we've been wireframing or prototyping and things, as we learn something from doing research midway through. But we're doing it based on research and not what like Sally in sales wants us to do. Everyone has a Sally in their life, probably. Okay, so now we're going to take a 15-minute break. So we have an hour and a half, and I want to go through the storyboarding process with a different scenario, and I want to challenge us to go all the way from storyboarding it out and trying to get through some of the screen flows like I showed you, like this. And maybe, if you have time, some more detailed screens sketched out. I mean, we don't have to go over to Envision or anything, whatever your tool of choice these days is. But I'd like to take the storyboard that we create, that you create, and then transfer it into some flow diagrams like this. And then, if you have time, some screens. So let's set it up. We're going to all pretend that we work at a UX agency, and this airline wants us to help them figure out how to reimagine the traveler experience. But if we were an agency, we'd say, well, that's too big. Like, what are we going to focus on? So the problem that we want to focus on is this. How might we help stranded travelers understand their compensation options for food, accommodation, and ground transportation, you know, if the flight is canceled, delayed, something like this. Now, we would never just go start doing this without doing research, so lucky for us, I wrote out a little story of some research. This is my story of what happened to me a week ago, a pretty large disaster, but I'll give you guys all a copy of this, so you should definitely take notes, but I thought it'd be helpful to have this written down as well, so you can go back and you can ask me questions, or at least you'll have this documented. And because I was bored after how many hours this went on, I have some Instagrams to show you, just for fun. Okay, so last Friday, I was in Ottawa, Canada. That's where I'm from. Well, I grew up. And I was traveling back to New York and had to go through Toronto Airport. So that should normally be a 5-hour flight. It took 30 hours. And here's what happened. So left my parents' house at 2 o'clock on Friday, drove to the airport. Everything was fine, cleared, and then I noticed my flight was canceled. So I run over to the gate. What can you do for me? Like, what's going to happen? And they said, don't worry, there's plenty of time. You'll get on the next flight. So I got put on the next flight maybe an hour later. Still had time to make my connection to New York from Toronto. Head back to the restaurant to kill more time. And then I heard an announcement that this second flight would be delayed. So I'm still in Ottawa. My second flight's been delayed. And by the time I went over to that gate, the line was like 20 people deep. People were traveling to Dubai, Portugal, like all over. So everyone needed a lot of help. And then finally they sent an agent through telling us like what we should expect. So they said, oh, you're just going to New York. Get yourself to Toronto. And if you get stuck there, they'll give you a hotel. It'll all be fine. You'll get out the next day. But don't stay in Ottawa because you'll get stranded here for a long time. Meanwhile, I could not understand like what the weather was because no weather apps were showing any weather. Anyway, I trusted them. So let me get back to my story. Okay, so my safest option was to go back to Toronto because I'd get the hotel and flight, etc. So I had to wait until I landed in Toronto to know if I'd make my flight to New York because they couldn't tell me, well, we were in the air, so I didn't know. So I landed in Toronto at 10:30 at night, and my flight to New York took off at 10:50, 20 minutes later. There was no way I was going to clear customs and still make that flight. So the airline agent said, okay, go to gate B2 or something. So we all go to B2, and they say, oh no, go 15-minute walk to this other place in the airport. So we all go over there. I'm forgetting my images. So this was at Ottawa, canceled flight, killing time. My mom made me snacks, thank goodness, and so I didn't starve too much. Then we were on the runway in Ottawa, and they said, we're going to take off maybe, and then there was a ground stop. So I got silly on Instagram and used their funny filters. And then finally, when we get to Toronto, I realized, so it actually did snow here, because maybe not like Salt Lake City snowbanks, I don't know, but those snowbanks were pretty big, so I finally believed them after wondering if they'd made all this up. And then when I got over to this other part of the Toronto airport where they said to go, this is what it looked like. They said, so there was 40 or 50 people in front of me, and everyone, you know, traveling to different places. Toronto is like a massive international airport, so everyone needed a lot of hand-holding. And they all wanted to know, when am I going to get to my destination, and what are you going to do for me given this? And depending on people's scenarios, like some people qualified for hotels, some people qualified for taxis, taxi and hotel, hotel, taxi, food, hotel, taxi, no food. It was the most ridiculous scenario ever. So I got on the phone and I thought, I will beat all these people. I'll get on the phone and figure it out with the agent. But that, after 90 minutes, finally someone picked up, and then my phone battery was dying, so I had to charge it off my laptop. And they said, if I decline the airline hotel offering, I can still be compensated if I book my own hotel. So I thought to myself, well, decline the airline hotel offering, that must mean I must have to get to the front of that line and see the offer and then decide if I want it or not. It was very confusing. But it was unclear if I could book my own hotel and just submit it and get $150 back. So at the same time, I also noticed from Orbitz that they had rebooked me the next day. So, okay, that was Friday. So they said, you're on a flight the next day at 4:45 p.m. But I don't know about you, but I thought, I'm not really going to trust that. I didn't, even though I had the email, I wanted to hear from a real person. So I stayed in line, and next thing, it's 1:30 in the morning. I'm still not at the front of the line. But at this point, the agents said, oh, we have an idea. We're going to make a number system so you can all get out of line and go get food or go to the bathroom or something. So they started ripping up little pieces of paper. Literally, the guy, he's ripping up paper, writing numbers on, and he goes to the front of the line, and he's like, take a number. And people said, I'm not taking your number. Like, no one thought the system would work. I think number 2 guy took it, and the rest of the people, we all stood in line because we were like, this is a joke. So we all stood in line, and then I lost my spot. Okay, so then we're down to about 15 people in front of me, and then there was a tech glitch, and their computer could not issue hotel vouchers or something. So they said, oh, it might be another 20 or 30 minutes. So we're standing around. Finally, I reached the front agent. They processed my hotel, gave me this taxi voucher, and then they said, oh, yeah, we don't give food vouchers for your scenario. So then I realized at 10:30 at night, I could have just hopped on hotels.com and got somewhere for $80 and been done with it. But I didn't have the right information. There was misinformation. What someone on the phone told me was different from what I was reading on the website. And I thought, like, I didn't know if I wanted to chance it. So all in all, I got to my hotel at 3:30 in the morning. Here's the thing. I take a taxi to the hotel, and I was probably the 5th person there. And then I realized they've sent everyone to the same hotel. And it wasn't like a Hyatt with like 7 check-in desks. It was some boutique hotel where there was 1 check-in desk. Poor guy's like been working all day probably, and he has to process all these people at 4 in the morning. All these unhappy people at 4 in the morning. But the thing is, with the right information, somehow I could have avoided this and all these other people, and we could have been happily asleep at midnight or something and not waited from 10:30 until going to sleep at 4 a.m. So that's the setup. And what our challenge is, how are we going to help the stranded travelers understand their compensation options for the food, accommodation, and ground transportation? So the outcome is that we want to, let's just make it simple. We want me to be able to go from, I'm going to miss my flight, I have missed my flight, to finally being at the hotel, having everything I need, and making that happen a lot better than this total disaster that happened. So that's the problem we're solving. Any questions so far? Now, there are many different ways you could solve this. I think some type of app probably comes into play. But what we want to do now is go through the process we just did. So what we want to do is spend time creating the storyboard. But first, you can, if you want, skip the characters and moments and things. But I don't really recommend that. You can if you want, though. I'm not going to stop you. So we want to create that storyboard. Maybe you'll do a few versions if your team has different ideas of how this could be solved. Then we want to map out some of the different screen flows. And then I don't know if we'll have time to get here, but let's just see how this plays out. But, oh, and I forgot the most important part. Now you can go to that bit.ly link and you can get this presentation so that you can go back to like this, or the examples, so you're not totally working blind, because I know I've given you a ton of information. So now let me hop back to here, so you can have that link. So the PDF will now be at that link, which you can grab off bit.ly, and you'll be equipped with everything we've already gone through, in case you forget, which you probably have. So hopefully that sets you up. So first, create the storyboard. And I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes, but I'm going to walk around and check in. And if questions, everyone talks about storytelling, like I said, as a way to talk about your product after it's done, and we think, oh, it's a marketing thing or something. But I think it's so powerful when it comes to the product development process. And if you think of it, it can also help everyone get aligned, including maybe your marketing teams, if you have that, on the story, so that the story they market matches the story you built, because sometimes that doesn't always happen. But the beauty of this is you can use whatever tools you want. It's not like you need to jump into learning yet another tool in our industry or something. Super simple, very quick, and you can invite others into the process. And like you said, what's your name again? Okay, well, both of you mentioned this. Now I lost my train of thought. Not ending up wasting so much time in meetings and realizing differences about assumptions about features and things, or disagreements, and getting that alignment way more sooner, and hopefully in a little bit of a fun and playful way for your teams. So I forgot to hand out the prize things, but I'll tell you about that in a second. But if you have questions, I'll be around, and I have everyone's email. I'm going to get an updated copy in case there were late registrations or something. And I'll email you out a link to this and a bunch of articles and stuff that I think would be helpful. And then that's it. Enjoy the rest of the time here. Hopefully we get some snow, maybe. So thanks.